Okay, so I readily admit there's stuff that I probably should be talking about more on this channel, because I haven't really been a Transformers channel for a long time. I am still technically covering Transformers Prime, but that's like a proven good show. One that people like and have fond memories of, that they're nostalgic for, that I'm nostalgic for. I'm not just getting in front of a camera every so often to bitch about what I think is a genuinely bad representation of a franchise I really enjoy. This is basically going to be that. It's going to be less of a coherent review and more just me whinging and complaining about the new Netflix Transformers show, Transformers War for Cybertron Siege, because I didn't like it. Now, if you follow me on Tumblr, you may have noticed that back when the show first dropped, or shortly after anyway, I gave a brief summation of my thoughts back then. I said it was okay, but not great. My opinion of it has actually gone down since then, especially seeing... This is going to sound really petty, and it is a little bit, I guess, technically. Especially seeing how much other Transformers fans seem to really love this show. And that's not to say that there isn't anything good about it. There are definitely good things about this show, don't get me wrong. But I also feel like it has a lot of problems. And yes, there's other content I could be making right now. I really did intend to get more content out for you guys in the last few days, but I have been sick with a stomach bug. And while I have been able to record, I've been recording some commentary for gaming stuff. I have looked like crap for several days. This is the most presentable I've looked in several days, and I still look pretty bad. This is my lamest overshirt, and this t-shirt that I'm wearing is very, very old. But literally, this is the first time all week, essentially, that I have felt like I looked good enough to do something in front of the camera. And I also need to get my thoughts about this show out there once and for all, my final thoughts, so I can move on from it. Now, Transformers Siege, the new Netflix show. This is the companion show to the current, it's not like the highest end Transformers toy line, but the highest end regular retail Transformers toy line. This is the evolution of what was called the Classics toy line, then the Universe toy line, then Generations Reveal the Shield, and so on and so forth. It was Combiner Wars, then it was Power of the Primes, now it is War for Cybertron. We're in the Earthrise section of the three-part War for Cybertron toy line right now. Moving into the Kingdom third, the final third, which I'm very much looking forward to. And this is something that's been happening for a while. I don't know what studio does it. I could look it up, but I don't really care. This is something that's been going on for a while. I think there was one for Combiner Wars and then one for Power of the Primes that was like machinima grade CG animation, but was basically this exact same concept. It was a short series which used the models of the toys from the most current toy line to tell a story which incorporated aspects of Transformers lore from all over the place into one cohesive story, sort of a little bubble version of what the aligned continuity, which contained the aforementioned Transformers Prime, also tried to do. Because one of the things that the blanket term for it is still just the Generations toy line. One of the things that it's always tried to do back since it was the Classics toy line is it's always tried to take characters from everywhere in Transformers lore and sort of update their look while still staying true to who they were at their core. Like if a new version of a Generation 1 character, like let's say Optimus Prime, is released in the Generations toy line, then you're not going to get a radical departure from who or what Optimus Prime was at his basest, at like his debut. You're going to get whatever up-to-date version of Optimus Prime you can get using modern toy construction methods. And so far, I gotta say, the War for Cybertron toy line has been amazing. It's so good. And I want to get this out of the way right out the gate. I am coming at this from the perspective of someone who is a Transformers hobbyist. I collect Transformers. I had some as a kid, but I didn't have a collector's mindset back then, so I didn't actually hang on to any of those toys. But ever since the movies, which are garbage, and the movie toys started coming out, I've been collecting again because while I don't really like the movies, the first one's okay, but I don't really like the movies, I liked the toys. So I started collecting Transformers at that point, and I have been since then. I don't buy literally every single toy that's released. If I buy a version of a character that I like, I tend to just stick with that. Or if there's multiples, I split them up by toy line and display them separately. But I am a collector, I am a hobbyist, but I'm not someone who's like super obsessed with Transformers lore. And maybe that's where I'm having a problem here. Maybe people who are like super obsessed with Transformers lore, maybe to them this show is a refreshing new take on things, right? But the idea behind the Siege show on Netflix was always supposed to be that this was like the definitive companion to this toy line, which was attempting to, as I mentioned before, more so even than the entirety of the Generations line, like specifically the War for Cybertron toy line trilogy has specifically been trying to be sort of the toy line equivalent of the aligned continuity, to retell the story of Transformers from the Thousands-Year War between the Autobots and the Decepticons on Cybertron up to all the stuff that happened beyond that on Earth and beyond. So, of course, the expectation was that the show that was a companion to that, that used the models of the toys from that, would be the same thing in show form. Right? And this was another one of those super short, heavily serialized streaming shows. And I am still going to do a video about this at some point, I swear. But, man, I hate those more and more the more I watch them. Like, have I used this example before in another video? Maybe, I don't know. Star Trek Picard was a pretty good show. I enjoyed it a lot because it was very heavy on Data and very heavy on 7 and 9. Best characters in the whole franchise, aside from everybody on Deep Space Nine, but that's beside the point. It was a solid show. Patrick Stewart was great in it. The new actors and the characters they portrayed were fine to pretty good, but it could have been so much better. For the same reasons that this show could have been so much better. Heavily serialized, short season streaming shows. And I say streaming because streaming is what created this form of televised storytelling, right? They have no status quo. They have no downtime. They have no breathing room for... I'm going to use the term filler, but I don't literally mean filler. They have no time for episodes where the status quo is in place. It's going to be in place for the next couple of episodes. So the main storyline, while it's still there, while it's still affecting things, while the characters haven't forgotten about it, it can be relegated to a mention or to a B-plot. And we can get character-focused stuff as the A-plot of the episode for a couple of episodes at a time between major events. So, using Star Trek as an example again, what Deep Space Nine did. If you've seen Star Trek Deep Space Nine, it was a serialized show with a continuous storyline, but it was still episodic. It was an episodic show that had heavily serialized elements. And I know some people disagree with me, but I feel like that is the ideal form of storytelling because it allows you to explore characters and their motivations and their backstories and get to know them and allow them to get to know each other when they're not constantly under fire, either figuratively or literally. It helps us to understand why the characters make the decisions that they make better without having to just suppose their motives. And like a really good short-form serialized show can still do these things without those status quo fillery episodes, sure. I think, for example, some less than others, but the Netflix Marvel shows do a pretty good job of this without really having status quo episodes, filler episodes. But this show isn't a show that can do that. It wasn't able to do that for me. Like, yeah, there were some side quests and stuff that the characters went on that weren't the literal main storyline of the show, that were kind of offshoots of it. But this show still felt like it got from point A to point B to point C before I'd even figured out fully what was going on in point A. It was absolutely ridiculous. Characters are introduced, we get a neat introduction to them, and we get a feel for who they are, and then suddenly they're like best friends with everybody, and they're willing to die for the cause, and they become just another cog in the machine, another figure wandering around in the background, shooting at the bad guys and getting shot at themselves. They lose all personality because there's no time in between major events for their personalities to shine through. The rare exceptions here are the character of Bumblebee a little bit, Optimus Prime, and Elita 1. And then some of the villains too, but I'm not really going to talk about the villains much here because honestly, if you want my review of the villains in this show, they were fine. They were not the best part of the series, but I definitely enjoyed them more than the heroes most of the time. And getting to know Optimus Prime better than most of the other characters in this series was definitely a point against it for me. Because this version of Optimus Prime is by far my least favorite out of any form of Transformers media that I've ever consumed. Ever. Like, back when the original series first aired, you had viewpoint characters, you had kid appeal characters, that was your human characters, and Bumblebee and characters like that. Ealey, sort of, though nobody really liked him. But Optimus Prime was still the protagonist of the show. He was still the primary hero of the show. There were definitely episodes that didn't touch on him, episodes that focused on other characters that he wasn't a part of, but he was still overall the protagonist of the show. Most modern Transformers shows, though, have moved away from that and made somebody like Bumblebee, for example, the protagonist of the show. Or in the case of Prime, it was mostly Jack and RC. While Optimus remains this lofty figure above everything. Because, quite frankly, that's how Optimus Prime should feel. Optimus Prime is this larger-than-life character, and like he still was in that original series, but he wasn't to the degree that he is now because of the way the lore has expanded his character. Just like in Transformers Prime, in this series, this war has been going on for thousands of years on the Transformers' home planet of Cybertron, and Optimus, the leader of the Autobots, and Megatron, the leader of the evil Decepticons, have a history, to the point that Optimus constantly and consistently wishes that Megatron would make better choices, while meanwhile Megatron feels betrayed by Optimus because they used to be on the same side. Kind of. And if you know anything about Transformers lore, you will get that immediately, and it makes sense, because, I mean, look at these two characters throughout the franchise. They do have a long history with each other, because the franchise is very, very long. Just in terms of, like, the meta-ness of it, they have this long history with each other, so it makes sense to write that into the narrative of each new version of these characters. But the dialogue in this show that was meant to allude to that past relationship was the most, like, I don't even know how to describe it, vague, mundane, drivel. Like, they never go into the specific history of the characters. We never hear what exactly their connection was. The assumption is just, hey, if you're watching this, you're probably a fan of Transformers, so you know vaguely what these characters might have meant to each other, so you don't need to know the specifics. We're not going to spend time on it. But then they bring it up so many times. If they just dropped a little bit more of the story each of those times, we'd actually know definitively what the relationship between these two characters used to look like in this iteration of the universe. As of right now, though, I have no idea. I can guess. I'm assuming it's probably similar to what it was in Transformers Prime. That seems to be what they tend to go with nowadays. As far as I know, I don't read the comics a lot, so maybe it's changed since then. But I'm assuming it's something similar to how things were in Transformers Prime, but I don't know. I just know that these characters used to mean something different to each other. And now they hate each other. Except Optimus sort of doesn't hate Megatron. He still wishes Megatron wasn't a baddie, even though Megatron is literally trying to commit genocide of all the Autobots. That's literally the plot of this season, is that Megatron is trying to get this uber powerful artifact called the Allspark so that he can use its power to literally transform all Autobots into Decepticons, turn them effectively into brainwashed drones, wiping out the Autobot species. And that is just one example of how I feel like this show mishandles where it tries to reinterpret established lore. I also don't like how they handle the character of Ratchet. Usually he's this crotchety, curmudgeon-y Dr. McCoy type medic who also has some technical expertise, because of course he does. Medic for a Transformer means engineer, basically. But he always deeply respects Optimus Prime. He's always a stalwart Autobot because he genuinely believes that being an Autobot is the best way to help as many people as possible. Here, he's like some guy who lives in the wilderness and patches up people regardless of what side they're on. And, like, I feel like there's probably a dozen Transformers characters who could have been that guy apart from Ratchet. That they just made it Ratchet because Ratchet is a recognizable G1 character. And then there's Bumblebee. There's this show's version of Bumblebee, who, in recent iterations of the story, since everybody hates Hot Rod for some reason, the original heir to Optimus Prime, Bumblebee is kind of Optimus Prime's heir now. And maybe the show is going in that direction. I could see it going in that direction based on what happens here. But in this version of the show, Optimus Prime's trusted scout, again, one of his most faithful followers, one of his most faithful allies, is a mercenary who will work for either side. I mean, this is like the good boy character, the goodest character in the show, aside from possibly Optimus Prime himself. And he's a fucking mercenary. Apologies for my language, but very, very angry about that one, guys. Very angry about that one. That one, the more I think about it, the more pissed off I get. And yet, by the end of this season, which is, I think it's only like 6 episodes long or 9 episodes long or something. Yeah, 6 episodes long. It's 6 episodes long. By the end of those 6 episodes, Ratchet is basically in with the Autobots, and Bumblebee is in with the Autobots, but not of his own choice. He's not even in with the Autobots of his own choice. He doesn't even choose to stand up and be a hero. He's forced into it. He's manipulated into it by receiving some really, really disappointing Destiny thing, which was their attempt to add to the lore. As far as I know, I'm not going to delve too much into detail about what specifically it was, but this thing, it's this energy force. It's supposed to be sort of a counterpart to Optimus Prime's matrix of leadership. This energy force is passed from its previous bearer to Bumblebee, and maybe this is from elsewhere in Transformers lore, from existing Transformers lore. Maybe it's from the comics or something. Again, I don't really read those. But as far as I know, this was new. This was a new thing, and Bumblebee is saddled with it for no adequately explained reason. They don't explain why he's the one who ends up with it. And the fact that he has it compels him to side with the Autobots. And I don't buy, by the end of this series, by the end of this season, rather, because there's going to be at least 2 more seasons of this thing, from what I understand. I don't buy that by the end of this season, he's actually with the Autobots of his own choosing, and I don't like that either. I don't like when the heroes are forced to work together. I think a hero in fiction should make the choice to be a hero. That's very important to me. And then this thing, which could have been the most interesting part of this overall series, this very different and yet in some ways equally powerful, equally potent counterpart to the Matrix of Leadership, by the end of the season, it doesn't even exist anymore. We barely even understand what it is and how it functions before they erase it from their lore forever. How disappointing is that? And then there's Optimus himself. I alluded to this earlier, but Optimus is awful in this show. He is the worst leader. He makes all the wrong decisions. He has apparently been doing this for thousands of years, because again, this is a very long, very involved war that he has apparently been leading his forces in for thousands of years, and yet he behaves like someone who doesn't know what he's doing. And like, I get it. It's appealing when Optimus Prime is going to be your protagonist or one of your co-protagonists, to put him on that story arc, that character arc, where he has to grow from a novice leader to an experienced and heroic one, where he has to grow from, like, this green version of Optimus. Not literally. Like, he could literally be green, but I mean figuratively green, not literally green. But this green version of Optimus to something comparable to the larger-than-life hero that he was in practically any other version. But you can't do that with an Optimus Prime who, one, has already been leading the Autobots for thousands of years, because he'd have thousands of years of experience. His character arc would have already happened at this point. And two, already has the matrix of leadership, which I've talked about a couple times now in this review, but if you don't know what it is literally the repository of experiences of all past Autobot leaders. Like, the Transformers animated version of Optimus did this really well, because neither of those things were true for that version of him. He really was a novice leader, and he didn't have the Matrix, so he didn't have all that past experience baked into his person. There is no excuse for this version of Optimus to be so bad at what he does, and quite frankly, all of his friends, all of his closest allies in this show, were all smarter than him, and I do not buy that they wouldn't have abandoned him and formed their own little Autobot group that would have been far more effective long before the events of this series started. Like, it's implied, if not outright stated, like, you can read it a couple of different ways, but I'm gonna be generous to the show and say implied. It's implied a couple of times that the only reason they still follow him is because he holds the matrix of leadership. That again, they feel compelled to help him. His most trusted lieutenant, aside from Ultra Magnus, who we never actually see interact with him as far as I remember, Elita 1, who is one of my favorite characters and a very underrepresented character in Transformers media for how important she is. She's supposed to be like one of Optimus's various leadership counterparts. She leads her own band of Autobots in the original show. She's so much better at this than he is, and she keeps giving him excellent advice, and he doesn't listen to her. He never listens to her, and yet she still sticks around. I assume because they're together, and I mean, apparently Optimus is really hot. Like, that was a thing in Prime, too. There were even, like, human characters thirsting after Optimus.
So, where's Optimus?
On a scouting mission with Bumblebee. Sorry to disappoint.
And I wore heels and everything.
Mom!
So I guess he's quite the looker, which implies, at least to me, that the strongest female Autobot character is only sticking around when she could be doing so much better, not just for herself, but for other people elsewhere, is because Optimus is attractive. And they're together. And that feels kind of gross to me. But Elita was the best part of the show. I liked her a lot. Optimus, though, sucked. And I hope he gets better, but he sucked. Like, I didn't even really like the performance behind the character either. Like, the animation in this is really good, right? It's a little dark and dreary. There's a lot of fog everywhere. But the animation's good. It's solid. The character models are good. The CG's good. But most of the voice work was fine, if not great. But, and I mean no offense to the actor, I really didn't like the performance behind Optimus in this show. He didn't have the gravitas of other versions of Optimus. Like, again, it felt more like they were going for a Transformers animated kind of Optimus Prime voice. But even that version of Optimus Prime, I think, came off as more confident than this guy often did. He was mostly just flat and uncertain sounding. He didn't have that larger-than-life quality that virtually every other version of the character has. It really bugged me, more so than it probably should have. It also bugged me that this show is actually kind of brutal. Like, there's, at one point, sorry, I'm fixing my hair a lot. At one point, a character who is actually supposed to be pretty important, which bums me out because I was hoping we'd get to see her more. Because she's another one of those, like, characters who are claimed to be really important, and yet they're very underrepresented in media. She's ripped apart limb from limb and killed on the screen. And, like, I get they're robots, but that was still pretty brutal. Also, I don't buy that the damage she sustained would have killed her, but she's just dead now, and it sucks. And, like, the characters who were with her at the time, I also don't buy that they were trying their best to keep her from getting killed either. It kind of felt like they were half-assing it. It really bummed me out. It was a very bad scene. And it's not the only really brutal scene in this show. Like, again, they're robots, and it's not like they're using real bullets. They're using laser blasts and stuff. So, like, I think kids might be able to watch this, but not, like, really young kids. Not kids who are in the age demographic of the other current Transformers shows. That being Rescue Bots Academy and Cyberverse. And those are the kids who are going to get this show recommended to them because they're the ones who are watching those other shows on Netflix. Like my nephews are over here several days a week for at least a couple hours at a time. And I have had to go out of my way a couple of times to make sure they don't watch this show. They're 3 and 5 and they are too young to watch this show. And then there's the fact that the specific plot of this show is that the Autobots need to get the Allspark off of their home planet of Cybertron so that Megatron can't use its vast power, and this leads to them also having to evacuate the planet in a ship called the Ark, leading to the further events of the franchise. That story is effectively the story told in flashback form in the show Transformers Cyberverse, which, despite being geared towards a relatively young audience, is a very good show. I've been watching it recently. I'm not super far along, but I've been watching it recently. And while the specific details are different, obviously, it's effectively the same story, told better, with better characters, and overall just, it's more fun to watch. I guess at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. I didn't have fun watching this show. I kept waiting for it to get fun, and it never did. And the trailer for Part 2, which I had hoped would make the show fun, because the Part 2 of the show, Earthrise, was, I thought, supposed to take us to Earth, the setting of the original series, and give us a more modern take on that premise. But based on the trailer that we've gotten for it so far, that's not what it is at all. It doesn't seem any more fun than this was. It seems just as dreary and just as brutal, and frankly, I don't want to watch it. I have been so put off by this show that I don't want to watch it. Between finally watching Cyberverse and seeing that it's effectively just a better version of what this show tried to be, and then seeing the trailer for the Earthrise section of this trilogy, I have lost all interest in this show entirely. And quite frankly, I don't understand the positive reception that it's gotten. I just don't get it. And I'm not trying to like gatekeep and say that, these guys must not be real fans because they like this show and I don't. And that's not what I'm saying, right? If you like this show, great. I'm happy for you. I just don't get it. And this isn't even like me being salty that it's not like past versions of the franchise. That's not what the issue is here. But I've said similar stuff to this before. If you're going to remake a thing, while the specific details of the characters' lives can and should be different, the people they are shouldn't be. And the people that these characters were just felt so radically changed from the characters I know that this didn't feel like I was watching a Transformers show. I didn't feel like I was watching Transformers when I watched this. It bummed me out a lot. There are some redeeming qualities, though, as I've said. Trying to finish on a positive note, again, the animation was good, the character models were good. The voice acting, for the most part, was fine, and the villains were okay. Megatron was pretty threatening. I really liked, actually, Jetfire's arc. I thought it was pretty well handled. It was kind of a series of short, not really B plots, but like short background elements that all strung together. They were pretty good. That made for a pretty good little brief character arc. That was pretty neat. And this show's versions of Soundwave and Shockwave are pretty solid too. So like it's not all bad. I'll give the show maybe like a 3.5 or a 4 out of 10. It's not awful. It's definitely something that if you're a Transformers fan, I still think you should give it a shot, at least, right? I didn't like it. I didn't feel like I got anything out of this. Though, that's not entirely true, because arguably the current toy line wouldn't exist if this hadn't been planned as a parallel release to it. And as I said before, the current toy line is very, very good. And that might actually be part of the problem, now that I think about it. I just kind of don't feel like the quality of this show was reflective of the quality of that toy line. As per usual, though, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of Transformers Siege, the Netflix 6-episode CGI series? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.